Welcome to the Inside Silverstone podcast, a business podcast covering all things tech, engineering, innovation and motorsport. Hosted by me, Chris Broome.
And me, Fiona Pawley. This is a series of unscripted conversations with leading business owners and high-tech talent, talking about their experiences within the Silverstone and motorsport business communities. Welcome to this episode of Inside Silverstone, a business podcast that talks about all things high-tech, innovation, engineering and motorsport. I'm your host, Fiona Pawley, and thank you very much for dialing in and listening to this podcast. Today, I'm really excited because I am talking to a very dear friend of mine, Leena Gade, who is the, let me get this right, Vehicle Dynamics Centre Manager and Race Engineer for Multimatic. Welcome to Inside Silverstone, Leena. Nice to see you.
Hello, Fiona. Nice to see you too.
How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Mainly because I'm talking to you and you've brightened up my day.
Oh, thanks, Tom. So we've got a lot to get through today because you are a woman of many titles, I have discovered in our prepping for this lovely conversation that we're going to have today. So let's get started. Do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners? Who is Leena Gade?
Yeah, so as you said, my name, Leena Gade. I currently work for a company called Multimatic. They're Canadian based, and my job function is to look after the Vehicle Dynamics Centre, which is based in Thetford in Norfolk. But one of the other parts of my job is to be a race engineer. I've been race engineering since around 2010, when I used to work at Audi Sport, Team Yoast. And that was on their LMP1 project, which is a project where a sports car is developed mainly to go and compete at Le Mans. I was there for a good 9 years before I kind of moved on and did a few other things. And my current role as a race engineer is actually with McLaren on their NEOM McLaren Extreme E project, which is an off-road racing series that's a fully electric car. So I have my fingers in a lot of pies.
In a lot of pies, absolutely. And for those of our listeners who are not necessarily motorsport fans, you started. Let's kind of go back a little bit. What got you into engineering in the first place? How did you end up being a race engineer?
I was quite young when I decided I wanted to be involved in engineering. I had always been interested in how things work, so pulling objects apart in the house and kind of seeing what the mechanisms were behind them. And through some friends of my parents whose son was studying engineering, discovered what engineering actually was as a career and thought, well, that sounds like a lot of fun. I get to pull things apart every day. So I think that's what I want to do. And a few years later, that was when I was 10, and a few years later, when I was about 12 or 13, I started watching F1 on the BBC. And the two commentators at the time were James Hunt and Murray Walker. They were hugely emotive and very passionate about the sport. But the one thing that they brought to the audience was, okay, they're the race cars, they're the race drivers, but look at all these people behind the scenes. You have all these engineers and they make these race cars, and then you've got the mechanics who maintain them and look after them. There's this whole world out there that you could be a part of if you wanted to be. And that got me interested in what was happening in motorsport as an engineer. And I thought, actually, that sounds like a lot of fun. I think that's what I want to do. So I spent most of my teenage years reading up about motor racing, about the engineering behind it. I was quite lucky at the time that F1 cars around the early 90s were these sort of active suspension, really cool, clever pieces of kit that were very kind of engrossing for you as a spectator. And I guess that's kind of where the passion started. It was a while before I actually did start working in motor racing. I went into automotive first, straight out of university, which is actually quite good because it gave me a grounding in the automotive side of things and then how cars worked. And then just by volunteering with teams on weekends, started as a mechanic and a data engineer, got to make a whole load of contacts and eventually landed at Audi Sport as an assistant race engineer. So that's all of it in a nutshell.
That is a bit of a nutshell. And and your career has evolved and evolved. You've been with Multimatic some years now, and as you say, you fairly recently joined the NEOM McLaren Extreme E team. When you think about that 10-year-old girl and you think about, oh, I like breaking things and fixing things. I bet you're a bit of a nightmare for your parents. But, you know, I know you've told me a story where you'd take the radio apart and then put it back together and there was a load of spare bits because you'd made it more efficient.
Yep, absolutely.
When you think about that 10-year-old girl and you think about where you are today and your successes, and again, for our listeners that aren't necessarily motorsport fans, the Le Mans 24 Hours is a really, really big and challenging kind of pinnacle of sports car racing. You know, there can be 60 cars on the grid that everyone wants to win, whether it's their category or whether it's overall. And actually, you have achieved something that not many people have achieved. You've managed to, with the support of your team, you know, race engineer and win Le Mans 3 times. And for our viewers that are watching on YouTube, that shiny gold thing in the background is the trophy, and I've got Leena to pop it in the background, and it's really heavy and it's almost as tall as you. So what do you think your 10-year-old self would think about that?
It's a good question. I've never been asked that. I think for Le Mans to mean something to people, you have to kind of understand a bit of the background of the race. But that trophy is not something that you see every day. I mean, unless you go into Audi Sport or Team Yost or Porsche, for example, where they're all on display, and there's one missing from Yost's collection because it's here.
And just to clarify, you didn't steal it, right? It was given to you.
It was given to me. I didn't steal it. I may have hinted a few times that they had so many they wouldn't really miss one of them. And they were like, you're not having it, Leena. And then as I was leaving, they actually did give it to me. I tried giving it back at that point, saying, oh, it belongs to the team. They were like, well, we'll take it back. No. I think as a 10-year-old me, I think I probably would be slightly impressed. I would want to know what motorsport was about, because at that age, I actually had no idea what racing was. But if I think about 10-year-olds today, the reason I have kind of achieved what I've achieved is because I never felt there were any barriers stopping me. And if there were, I found a way around them. But I had parents who always encouraged me and said, you can be whatever you want, you just have to work hard and do well. And by the way, here are our stipulations for how you're going to do that. You know, they're both Indian, and they came from India to the UK in the 60s and my mum in the 70s. And their whole intention of coming here was to give their kids a good start in life with an education that they could use for their benefit. And then, you know, they could be anything they wanted. So for us as kids, there were no barriers. And I think that's quite important, because I think that played a huge part in the success that I realized. In fact, actually even getting to where I have in motor racing. But I realized that there's 10-year-olds maybe today that, you know, may feel the pressure that they need to have already decided what they want to be when they grow up. I was lucky, knew when I was 10, but most people don't. And it's important to realize that the world is a really big place and there's loads of different things that you can do. The one thing that you should always try is set your mind to it. And if it's the right thing for you to do, you'll find a way to get there and find a way to be successful. Sadly, it's all about hard work. There's no two ways about it. So I think those kind of words that my parents had for me as a 10-year-old and growing up as a teenager, it's probably what I'd say to most 10-year-olds today, that you've kind of got to try everything out, find something that you like and enjoy. And if you do it properly, so that you can find whether it's like the career that you want to be going into.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, absolutely. You fairly early on, even though you didn't necessarily know it was motorsport, but you had a kind of a crystal clear idea. You wanted to be fixing things, you wanted to be tinkering with things, you wanted to, you know, make things better from a particular mechanical point of view, very hands-on. And to be honest, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, really. You know, I quite haven't got there, and lots of other people haven't. And I definitely feel like the next generation of people coming through, you know, they're not going to have one career in one organisation. You know, that isn't the way of the world in which we work. And, you know, we're not even going to start talking about AI, but the influence of AI and how that's going to change the world of work is huge. You said you started in automotive. And again, you know, automotive and motorsport, they obviously go very hand in hand, and quite often one is funding the other. You know, the fun stuff in motorsport is invariably kind of led by the business side of automotive. When you were shifting from automotive into this motorsport culture, how would you describe the culture of motorsport or even automotive? What is it about that kind of culture that you have thrived and you've worked hard, but actually it keeps you engaged?
So when I went into automotive, I'd actually done a placement at Rover Cars when it still existed in the UK for 6 months, and that was part of my degree. And having gone into the working culture, I actually didn't really want to go back to university because the application of your engineering skills is quite different to sort of your academic engineering studies that you do. And I enjoyed that way more than I enjoyed kind of sitting behind books and computer screens and things like that. Fortunately, my personal tutor convinced me to finish my degree. And he was right in the end. I was going into my 4th year and I really needed to kind of get the degree under my belt because, as my parents had reminded me a few times, the world is your oyster at that stage. I then went into automotive, but for me at the time, it was sort of like the backup to not getting into motorsport, because I tried at that stage, but I had so little experience, if any at all, that I wasn't being considered for apprenticeships and things like that, because quite a few teams in the sort of mid-90s were looking for people who had a bit of experience at tracks, kind of understood what it was like to go racing, because it's a different culture to your average 9-to-5 job.
Absolutely.
And they basically kind of said, you need to go off and get the experience. So coming out of university with debts, I then end up at Jaguar. And it was probably the best move I made to get some experience of both engineering in business and also learning about how cars are put together, because my degree actually was in aerospace and I did some modules in material science, so actually not a lot to do necessarily directly with full-blown cars, let alone racing cars. And that was really good.
And just to say, I think some racing teams particularly really like to attract those aerospace engineers, right? Because actually your way of thinking and approaching the challenge, yes, obviously you need a spectrum, and we're going to get into NEOM McLaren Extreme E, and we're going to talk a little bit about electric and electrical engineering that's kind of gone through the roof in the last 5 years, but some organisations are really looking for those much diverse skills rather than just a motorsport qualification.
Yeah, and at the time there was no sort of specific qualification in motorsport engineering. I chose aerospace because I was interested on the aerodynamic side of things, wanting to either go into working in aerodynamics either as a CFD engineer or in the wind tunnel.
What's a CFD engineer?
A computational fluid dynamics engineer, so kind of just doing the wind tunnel but in a computer. They're huge processors. It's a lot of modeling. You create meshes, you create models of your car, specific components of the car, and you're looking at the airflow around them. In terms of motorsport, it's for primarily performance, but in terms of, for example, road cars, it might not necessarily be only performance. It could be so that the drag reduction means that the fuel consumption is better, that kind of thing. I will say that within about 2 months of going to university and doing the academic side, I realized wind tunnels were not for me, and neither was sitting behind a computer doing that kind of thing. But engineering gives you a grounding in how to approach problems and attempting to solve them 9 times out of 10 as a team, because you don't always have the solution coming from just one human being. And that's because we all approach problems in a different way, and we think differently. So having gone into Jaguar, I was kind of learning about cars, I was learning about these concepts, but actually seeing how the business ran, because there wasn't an endless pot of money to just keep developing your cool niche bits on a car, or you have to stick to a budget because you need to launch a car. Every day that it's delayed from being launched equals however many millions that the company is going to lose. And you don't learn any about it at university. You only learn that in the world of work, because a business exists primarily to make money. If you let engineers just go off and do their engineering things, you will have some very expensive toys on your hands, because engineers don't tend to kind of see money as sort of like a restriction on
finite resource.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that gave me a great understanding of big organizations. Jaguar was owned by Ford at the time, and there were a lot of principles and processes that Ford brought in, plus training programs and expertise from the US and from Germany as well. So got to meet a lot of people, got to learn so many different aspects of the engineering business, but I still had itchy feet to get into motorsport. So whilst all that was going on in my day job, I was volunteering with a race team that were building Formula V cars, and then got a bit of experience to sort of understand the culture of motorsport when you go to a racetrack, because it's not all glamorous. People always say that. I can assure you it isn't, and you know that as well.
I know, it's very glamorous.
Don't know which bit of it is, because I've never seen it, but
the pretty shiny thing behind you is quite glamorous, right?
It is quite glamorous.
The trophy is quite glamorous.
Yeah.
You know, it is not. You know, motorsport, and I talk about this a lot. It's a little bit. It can be quite addictive in terms of the culture of motorsport. It's a little bit like working for the circus. You know, you're up sticking, and you know you're moving on, and you turn up at a circuit. And if you're in a race series, you know, when you're kind of racing, whether it's for Extreme E or whether it's in IndyCar or whether it's in, you know, WEC or, you know, Formula One.
Yeah.
Everyone wears the same clothing, so you wear the same uniform. All the trucks are in the same order. All the, you know, the layout of the paddock is exactly the same. The garage boarding is the same. The only thing that really changes is the food and the weather. You can get quite disorientated, can't you, with that sort of picking up your life, moving on, going racing, big pressure cooker, long hours. You know, you've talked a little bit about that team ethic, and, you know, I'd love to know more about Multimatic, because it is not the only reason I am aware of Multimatic is because you work there, and we've talked about it. But they are, you know, a multifaceted engineering business that works in, you know, automotive and motorsport and other special projects. And we touched on at the beginning, you know, they're based in Canada, they're based in the States, they've got loads of locations in the UK. So, you know, tell us a little bit about kind of what Multimatic does, and your role there, but also, you know, what the kind of culture is like for that in that environment as well.
So, as you pointed out about the name Multimatic, not a lot of people know who Multimatic are. If you're in the Silverstone region, you might know that there's a Multimatic Motorsports workshop in Brackley. You may have seen it, and that's a base for our European racing team. But Multimatic, I first came across them in 2016 when in the GTE class, the Ford GT car was competing, and it won its class. And it was a phenomenal looking car. I noticed it because I might have been used to my LMP1 cars, but this amazing GT car, which made an absolute raucous sound in the pits, came back, took class honours, which is the first time they've done it since 1966. So it was really iconic. Saw the car, went and had a look at it. Ganassi were running it at the time, and got talking to them, and they said, oh yeah, there's a company called Multimatic that developed this. And I thought, Multimatic? Well, who are they? You don't know? Have a look. And the symbol was on the side of the car. So I looked them up and I saw what they did, and it was very, very much focused on what was going on in Canada and North America at the time. The next time I spoke to them, which was just before I took my position with them, I had the opportunity to visit the site in Thetford, but then also go to the headquarters in Canada and actually see what goes on there. So I got to see the Ford GT car being built. And this is when I got a much better understanding of what Multimatic as an organization do. It's a little bit of everything. Started out with making door hinges for cars. You think how many's on a car? That's quite a lot. And supplying the big three manufacturers in the US is a big deal because it makes you a lot of cash. But there's all these different facets of Multimatic, which have got to focus on either niche engineering or creative solutions to problems. Sometimes problems that you never thought you had, like, for example, having electric doors and the kind of self-opening kind of doors and that kind of thing. But then also there's lots of patented technology we have, and there's a specific damper technology which the business has grown since the early 2000s, from being just on Indy cars to all sorts of different race cars, also road cars, most recently in off-road cars like the Ford Bronco. There's a particular type of damper that is used for that, for the specific application of going over all sorts of different surfaces with really big bumps and jumps and things. But also we provide some services. So my department, for example, provides services to primarily race teams, but also automotive customers, where you bring a car along, it gets put on our test rigs, and we will tell you from the data and results that we generate from specific tests what kind of dynamic behavior the car has, and also how to try and work around optimizing it for either having great ride when you're just driving generally on the road, or for lap time performance when you go to a track. So this company of Multimatic is kind of dotted all over the place. Currently, we've got lots of different divisions, and the actual division that I work for is special vehicle operations, and that includes the motorsport section. And from the motorsport side of things, at the moment, we've got partnerships with Ford for the Mustang GT3, the Mustang GT4, with Porsche for the 963 LMDH car. We've got lots of different things that are going on that we're involved in. So it's quite a diverse organisation from that point of view, and having lots of different locations around the world, get to meet people from all over the place.
Amazing. I mean, you're certainly not going to get bored there, right?
No. There's always something new in the workshop when I walk out of the back of the Vehicle Dynamics Centre, something crazy that's come along. So it's a really good place to work.
And because of being at Multimatic, that's how you are now one of the race engineers for the NEOM McLaren Extreme E team. Yeah. For those people that don't know, what is Extreme E and why is McLaren competing in that series?
Okay, so electric racing has grown over the years since Formula E came to the fore in late 2013, going into 2014. A lot of people wrote it off as a race series, saying, "Oh, that'll never take off. Whoever wants to have an electric car?" And then a few years ago, a certain problem with diesel cars meant that the world started looking at what we were doing, and it accelerated people's thoughts on changing how we power our transportation, basically. The same people that had created the Formula E series were looking at all the other different types of racing that goes on and where else they could apply this, and came up with wanting to go off-road racing with electric cars, which at the time of its inception, around 2019, there wasn't really anything going on in rallying or rally raid or anything like that had any electric sort of element that was immediately obvious to people. And they worked with their partner Spark, who based in France, Spark Technology. They have produced the Formula E car, but they designed and developed an off-road vehicle. And this thing is a bit of a beast. It's very, very different to any race car I've ever worked on. It's important to say it is a race car. And I say that because the style of racing is all geared around fully electric. We don't recuperate any energy, meaning whatever we charge the battery to, we just get to use it all up. You have two drivers in the car, one male, one female. You have to have those by regulation. And each driver does 2 laps around an off-road course with multiple other cars. So the races have got 5 vehicles in them. And you have a standard switchover for another driver. The other driver gets in, completes 2 laps. Imagine rallycross with a almost 2-ton car. That's huge, has massive amounts of suspension travel, does lots of jumps, sometimes rolls, but is based around a series that is actually meant to be completely sustainable. So there's 2 parts to Extreme E. One is we go to locations where there is a particular climate story to be told. So whether it be wildfires in Sardinia to problems with losing animal biodiversity around the seas around Saudi Arabia. To highlight those issues, if you use the platform of motorsport and you create some entertaining racing, you've got audiences from other backgrounds that might not necessarily watch, for example, Formula One or WEC or rallying.
Motorbikes or trucks.
And they watch something a bit different, but they get also told about issues in that particular area. I should point out, we don't go on pristine land and race on it. We work with environmental scientists who will look for the area around which we can actually have a race event itself. But the whole paddock is completely sustainable. So we don't use any power from the grid. We generate our own through hydrogen technology. There are set times where we charge the cars. Everything that we bring with us, we take with us. So all the rubbish goes as well. So there's no carbon footprint left. There's no footprint left once the teams have left. And we don't always go to the same locations. We tend to kind of dot around. So this year, the races have been in Saudi Arabia, Scotland, and Sardinia. There's 2 more to come, one which will be in Chile, one that still hasn't been quite confirmed. But last year we went to Uruguay. The series has also been to Senegal, because globally there's so many different climate issues that need attention and focus bringing on them. So that's part of the reason why Extreme E exists. Now that falls into McLaren's goals on improving their own sustainable metrics, I guess, and wanting to be a part of this. Plus, they want to appeal to an audience outside of just the standard Formula One. You may have noticed, or may not have noticed recently, but McLaren have sort of diversified away from just Formula One. We have a full electric racing group now, which includes the Extreme E project, but also Formula E. There's IndyCar, which goes on in the US, and then there's esports as well. And all of that side of motorsport brings in new audiences, but also attracts people into McLaren as a brand, wanting to know what McLaren do. And from the point of view of the electric racing group, we have a very strong partnership with NEOM, who are from Saudi Arabia. And a lot of that is centered around the development of the NEOM site, which is in Saudi Arabia on the coast. The whole point of that is to have a sustainable city, one that is going to bring people from all over the world into a location. But the idea of creating this place isn't so that we deplete the Earth's resources to make it. It's so that you can actually enhance what you have there and give back. So there's rewilding programs, there's centers of excellence for technology. There's a big port that's being created there, which is actually part of an existing port. There's all sorts of very niche, but very forward-thinking ideas that are coming out from this. And NEOM have been interested in the sustainability side. They could have selected multiple partners, but they selected McLaren. And that is because there's cross-pollination both ways. If there are projects that NEOM have got going on that they could use McLaren technology or McLaren expertise for, there's almost like a crossover of, well, we've got this going on, how can you bring your engineering into this, or would you be interested in that? And conversely, McLaren take some of the graduates who go into NEOM for a year's placement at McLaren Racing, so they get to see another side of the partnership that you have between McLaren and between NEOM. So on the face of it, it's not just about the Extreme E or the Formula E, actually. It is actually about the bigger picture of bringing partners who probably would never have had any necessary interest in racing in the first place, but you've taken 2 very different things and kind of married them up. And there's actually lots that they have in common, but also things that they can take from one side to the other.
Yeah, I mean, fascinating to see the development from, kind of electronic technology and the uptake in the everyday in terms of, where we are heading in terms of automotive, and then using these platforms of motorsport. And partnership is so important in business, right? Yeah. So, your Multimatic partnership with McLaren, McLaren's partnership with NEOM, actually it is through the partnerships and the ability to, like you say, transfer that knowledge, show a best practice. This is how we would tackle a problem. This is what we do in motorsport. Motorsport kind of has very, very distinct deadlines. So, race day is on, I'm going to assume race day is on Sunday at Extreme E.
It's a double header. So we have race day on Saturday and Sunday. All day.
Okay. So really intense timetabling, but the race happens at the time of the race. And if you're not on the grid, then you're not racing. Whereas in business, I think quite often people look at their deadlines and they obviously, estimate best endeavors, and deadlines creep, and there's lots of reasons why things sort of creep in terms of scope and projects and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Whereas motorsport is a very, there is a real team ethic in that way of working. We are pulling together. If I know my responsibility and I'm doing my bit and you're doing your bit, actually that creates our efficiency, that creates our innovation. And looking at, how are we attracting the next generation of talent? How are we attracting, people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different challenges in terms of that climate crisis, and better understanding what are the best solutions for those problems rather than going at it from just one direction, right? It is something that we as an individual, but also our businesses can be doing better and more of.
Yeah.
We talked about, next generation. We didn't mention this at the beginning, but one of the other titles that you have, I'm going to get you like the most enormous, recyclable business card. That's super, super long. Is that you're actually a trustee for the Silverstone Museum. Now, that's a fairly recent innovation at Silverstone for those of you that don't know that museum exists. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what they can see at the museum and why you're involved in that kind of project?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was approached a couple of years ago by the CEO of the museum to ask if I would be interested in becoming a trustee on the board. And the first reaction that I had was, oh my goodness, am I really that old? You are.
Or that wise, or that influential, or
none of that came to my mind. But actually, I had never been to the museum. I knew it had been on the cards. It's right on the outskirts of the circuit at Silverstone, just opposite Aston Martin F1, and there's a big technology park on the opposite side of the road. So when I got invited along, the CEO at the time said, why don't you have a look around the museum? Which I did. And I'm a motorsport fan, obviously. Having gone round, it wasn't just about motorsport. There was a lot about the history of Silverstone and the history of racing in the UK. A lot of stuff that I didn't know. And I found it absolutely intriguing walking around. I wasn't so taken by all of the older cars that I was seeing, but I was actually taken by a lot of the stories behind how Silverstone actually came about in the first place and how motorsport evolved in the UK. But also about individual stories in the background, because it was used as a military base in the Second World War, which I sort of was aware of, but I wasn't aware of the people who actually happened to work there. So walked around the museum, had a look at it, and thought, it's great. Okay, so how can I actually contribute to this? And in addition to having the museum itself does some schools programs where schools can come and visit. And we're all aware of those kind of things when we were kids, like going to the Science Museum, which is still somewhere where I act like a 3-year-old, or going to the Natural History Museum, or museums all over the place where we get to learn things. The museum at Silverstone does exactly the same thing, only they approach it in a slightly different way. They'll get groups of kids together of various different age ranges. And the idea of it is to get the kids interested in STEM. You can talk to children about STEM at school and they probably switch off, because if you don't have an interest in it, it's not going to really be something that you'll kind of go, I'm so enthusiastic about maths today. But if you can show them objects which have been created for a specific application, for example, a fuel cell from a Formula One car, and you can get them thinking, well, why is it made of this material? Why is it that shape? And why is it so small? You can then talk to them about what the needs of that fuel cell are and how engineers or scientists, mathematicians have had their input into it. And what struck me about those schools visits is I got to sit in on one of them, is how a group of kids who came to this museum without any prior knowledge of motorsport suddenly became interested in the things that they were looking at and handling, but then with so much enthusiasm went around the museum, and they might not become motor racing fans, but they walked away with an interest in STEM. That's probably more powerful than many other sort of programs that are out there. I then asked the museum a little bit more about those projects, because it was relying on schools coming to the museum. And they actually said, well, we don't just do that. Sometimes we go to the schools. So they had like a little bus that's sponsored, and they take some of these objects with them. It could be a piece of carbon fiber from broken bodywork to the fuel cell to radios to all sorts of things, and they'll go and visit schools who might not necessarily be able to get to the museum. The intention of that is to try and go further afield, away from the Northamptonshire, Silverstone area, to get kids interested in not just the museum, but also the sort of science, technology, engineering and maths side of things. And that's really unique, because not many places kind of go and take their museum to children, but also the concept of it's almost like easy for the museum in a way, because you've got so many teams around Silverstone, be it in Formula One or anywhere else, and they can give parts to the museum, and they find the creative way in which to get kids excited. So I agreed to go on the board. We meet once every quarter. There's lots of talk about business things and sort of the finances and how to attract investment, what the museum is trying to achieve, where it's trying to go to, who it's trying to appeal to. So there's multiple exhibitions that are going on over the summer. There's a big one with featuring some really iconic Formula One cars. So if you're a massive motorsport fan, in particular, fan of Nigel Mansell or Senna, you will see some of their iconic cars on display at the museum. But also there's all sorts of other aspects that have been taking place recently. There's car meets that happen outside the museum. It's a really interesting place, and I think anybody in the Silverstone area, even if you don't have an interest in motorsport, go along to the museum and have a look, because you will learn a lot about the area that I can guarantee you didn't know. But you'll also see why motorsport matters to the people who work in motorsport, why it instills this passion, why we feel a pride working in it, and contributing to motorsport as a business. It's a really great place to be.
Well, I have been to the museum, so I know very well what you're talking about. And if anyone's listening to this on summer holidays and you need something to do with the kids, or there are local schools that want to take advantage of that, or even if there are parents of people living and working in and around the Silverstone area, and their 10-year-old kid might be good at breaking stuff and making stuff and have a bit of an interest. It could be a place that sort of sparks some curiosity, right? Yeah. Because invariably when we're younger, you said your parents' influence obviously was the biggest influence. Invariably we are influenced either by our caregivers, parents, grandparents, or our teachers. And if those party of people don't have access to or are not familiar with the world of engineering and technology and innovation and, all of that fun stuff as well as motorsport, then, the opportunities for those young people to think, oh, actually, there's a career there for me, or, I can really add some value to the development of this part for, this purpose, whether it's the sustainability stuff that we talked about earlier. My entry to motorsport was an accident. Motorsport was never on in the house. It was not on the television. I'm not a fan. It was here's a 6-month job, see how you go, and kind of it lasted 10 years, that job. So I was either very good at it or they couldn't fire me. I don't know, one or the other. And that evolved. And absolutely, there is not a chance that I could ever be an engineer. It is not my skill. It is not my interest. However, as you know, I'm a big advocate for engineering. Leena and I worked on the FIA Women in Motorsport Commission, and we were tasked with attracting more racing engineers and more female racing engineers into the industry. And, I'm a big promoter of go and work for an engineering company, whether it's in the marketing department or whether it's in finance or, whether it's, sweeping the shop floor or, kind of on the tools, whatever it might be. There's lots of fun stuff. We talk about the stuff that Multimatic's doing. There's endless amounts of opportunities there. We talk about McLaren. Is it Formula One? Is it Formula E? Is it automotive? Is it, is it the Extreme E, going into these wonderful terrains to actually make an impact? You know,
Yeah.
it is such a wonderful career. So yes, anything we can do to help support you in getting more kids into that museum, then, you know,
Much appreciated.
please let us know. You so you know, in terms of your career, you know, obviously we've touched on it, there's been sports cars, there's been electric cars, there's been Indy cars. Is Formula One on the radar for you? Is that something that you would like to get the top trumps of, you know, race engineering cards?
I mean, I think if you kind of look at of what's happening in the world of racing, Formula One isn't sort of immune to the credentials of sustainability and looking at alternative fuel sources. And come 2026, there's going to be some major changes on this sort of engine development side, which, depending on which end of the argument you look at, it's either a good thing, or there's teams that are already saying, well, it's just going to be an all-out engine war. I think experiencing F1, I've never worked in F1. The closest I've actually come to kind of look, you know, interacting with F1 people has been through McLaren. And originally last year, we weren't based within the electric racing group. There wasn't such a thing. We were actually part of the heritage group, where there were the amazing heritage cars in the workshop. So that was quite nice to see, because a lot of those cars are the ones that I watched growing up as a kid. So yes, there's an interest in what goes on in F1, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how the world of motorsport adapts and changes, especially with should everything be electric, or should it be a combination? Should we be going hydrogen? Should we be doing just a synthetic fuel? What is it that's happening? And there's so much stuff that's going on, even around the Silverstone area, to look at alternatives to fossil fuels, be it the synthetic fuels or something different. Motorsport has to evolve for its own ability to survive. And actually, something that you touched on earlier about getting more kids interested, it's all well and good getting children interested in motorsport, but there are so many engineering questions that remain unanswered, and we're going to have a whole load more with how we live in a society, how we interact globally, what solutions we need to find to the various issues that are coming our way. And engineers don't just do motor racing. No. They actually have a role outside of motorsport in finding solutions to how roads are built, how your buildings are made, how can you make them more efficient, more heat-proof, or able to be insulated better across the winter. You know, there's lots of challenges that we face, and engineers are tasked, you know, part of the word, it comes from Latin, and it's about ingenuity, the ingenuity to find a solution. Formula One, motor racing in general, plays a part in that. If you can get people interested in what engineering means, which is finding solutions within a given time frame, with multiple constraints that you might have, you automatically create a workforce that gives you solutions to the problems that we've got coming our way. Still need the business people there, because as I mentioned earlier, engineers have a tendency to just go off in a direction and not realize that things cost money. But, you know, that's part of the challenge. And I think Formula One has had a massive sort of interest kind of put its way through Drive to Survive, and bringing racing to a different audience. It has a very powerful position in increasing the number of engineers that could be produced from universities or apprenticeships to go into the workforce. So I think it's going to be an interesting place to watch what happens and what comes next, because we have to start thinking quite quickly for the solutions we need. A lot of our problems are coming to our doorstep really quickly at the minute. What
have I not asked you that I should have done?
I mean, there's a whole load of questions that people normally ask, like, what's it like being a woman in motorsport? The great answer I heard that came out of my sister's mouth was, well, I don't know what it's like being a man in motorsport, so I can't really answer that question. And I'll stand by that.
Just to clarify, your sister also works in motorsport.
She does.
Yeah.
So don't ask me that question, because that's the answer. Okay. What haven't you asked me? I guess I've been lucky enough to be involved in all of these different organizations and platforms because of what I've done in the past. And you sort of touched on it at the beginning. I was listening to a podcast yesterday about the number of kids that are missing school and all the reasons why. And in my head, I was thinking I would never have missed school. My mum wouldn't have let me unless I was really ill. And I think the world is a really challenging place at the moment. The pandemic has not helped many, many young people.
Yeah.
And the challenges that they face are quite unique, ones that probably you and I are not familiar with at all, because we never had anything like that when we were younger. I guess the one thing I kind of want to say to everybody is we're living in really changing times. There's a lot of uncertainty that's going on. But for me, my solace to some extent has been going racing, but finding solutions to problems, being an engineer. I would not do any other job apart from running a chocolate shop. You know, in my daily life, I enjoy it so much. And I think I was lucky to be able to choose my career as young as I was. A lot of people don't have that, but there is a strong need for us as a society to kind of pull together and find solutions to some of the challenges we face, and trying not to be daunted by them. You can listen to a lot of podcasts about the environment and get very, very down. And I tend to find that I have to switch a lot of that off. But being a part of the extreme E side of things and learning about how you can race in a different way, that's been quite an eye-opener, and actually something that I think could spread across the board. And maybe that's, I guess, the message I want to give to younger people. Don't be daunted by what's coming. Look at it in a different way. Look at it as a challenge. Look at it as something that we as a society need to try and resolve, because it's very easy to feel quite negative about things and to feel quite sort of down about stuff. But we're the only ones that can change what comes next. So yeah, I think engineering is a great place to be. It offers a lot of solutions, and it appeals to more people than you think. And I think anybody can do this. If I can do it as a female, as a daughter of immigrants to the United Kingdom from the 60s and 70s, pretty much anybody can be a part of this really wonderful industry.
Thank you. Well, we're coming to the end of our chat today, and I am asking all of our guests this. What's your memory of either your first car or bike, or what's on the dream list of car or bike at the moment?
Oh, my first car was a Renault 5 GT. It was not the turbo. As much as I wanted one of those, my mum was not interested in me having something that would probably have ended up in an accident.
In the wall, yeah.
It was a great car. The registration was F283 MPP, and it was called Francois because it was a French vehicle.
Yes.
The MPP stood for Marcel Pepper Le Pieux, but we won't go into that. I love that car because it weighed absolutely nothing, and it had a 1.4 engine in it. And that's probably the first time that I realised you can have a BMW that's got a massive engine in it that weighs quite a lot more than your Renault. And off the lights, the Renault was quicker, which always used to really upset BMW drivers. Which is a target in the late 90s, I guess.
Yeah.
That car, it was quite simple to work on. So there were things that I could have fixed on it if I wanted to. And ever since then, I've had all sorts of other cars, be it company cars or stuff, things like that. But I've got a classic car that I own, which is a Fiat Dino. And I had the opportunity to spend a day with it last week, and that was more than enough. I needed to give it back to where it was in storage. It was fine. There's just a level of stress involved with starting it, stopping it, hoping it doesn't catch fire, that kind of thing. Yeah. It's a lovely car to drive. And actually, those are the kind of cars that got me quite motivated in engineering, because you can work on them, you can fix them, you can repair bits that go wrong. Modern cars today are slightly more difficult. There's a few more microchips in them.
You need a laptop to start with, I think.
My first car, which was a classic, and then these other cars in between. I did have a 20-year-old Golf until the end of February this year when my mum crashed into the back of it. Different story. And I've got my Dino. So, yeah, I've got ends of the spectrum. I don't need any more cars, I've decided.
Okay.
All the other classics can stay with other people. The trauma of the Dino was enough for one day.
I mean, you know, that first car, that first sense of freedom, and like you said, you know, kind of fixing it. I remember mine was a Peugeot 106, and my neighbour showed me how to change my brakes. I changed them, but
Nice.
he was kind of like, okay, this is how we do it, and pads and discs and all that kind of stuff. And interestingly, my friends didn't want to get in the car with me after that. So I was like, fair enough. So yeah, but that real sort of tinkering and getting under the hood of it all, and kind of that they are much more than bits of metal and now carbon fiber and electrics and whatever. They're quite special, aren't they?
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Leena. It has been a joy as always.
Thank you, Fiona.
You're welcome. And all of the show notes will cover where you can find out more about the NEOM McLaren Extreme E team. We'll also put some stuff up there about Multimatic and the museum. Without further ado, thank you very much, Leena. Thanks very much to our listeners. Please be sure to like, subscribe and review, and share this episode with your friends, and we will see you next time.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and please give us a 5-star review.
The Inside Silverstone podcast is produced by the team at Longhurst. To listen to more episodes, please visit insidesilverstone.co.uk. Please note neither Fiona or Chris work for Silverstone Park, Silverstone Technology Cluster or Silverstone Circuit.